Hello, and welcome to the Year 9 options presentation for the options uh, for Year 9 students in 2021. I'm Mr. Errington. I'm Assistant Head Teacher at Cardinal Hume School with responsibility for the curriculum, and part of my role is to coordinate and lead the options process each year. Now, we traditionally have an options evening sometime in February where parents can come along to the school hall while I go through this presentation and then give them an opportunity to stay back and ask any questions that they may have at the end of that presentation. Obviously, COVID restrictions have meant we can't have that meeting this year, so I'll go through the meeting and the presentation as I traditionally would, and I'll talk later on should you still have any queries about what you can do next. Hopefully the level of detail and the information I'm going to provide in the presentation will deal with all of those queries and give you the information that you require to move forward in the options process. But the fundamental aim of what we're looking to do here is to provide information to parents and guardians at home so they can sit down with their sons and daughters and discuss with them the options process and help them to make informed choices when moving forward. I think it's important to mention at this stage that the options process can often bring some stress and worry to students, and the aim of this information is to help people to talk through those stresses and worries, because many students will view the opportunity to make option subjects as a decision that may well affect what they can do or can't do later in life. And really, I want to dispel that myth right from the very start. The options process is an opportunity for students to specialise in certain areas within the curriculum, but it's not aimed at making life-changing decisions that are going to have a major effect on what they do later on in life, whether that's regarding to the pathways in terms of study or what they do as they enter the world of work. Before we look at the specific options subjects that are available to students when they move into Year 10, I think a good place to start is look at how the options fit into the wider school curriculum. To start off with, let's have a look at the curriculum intent. The curriculum intent is the school's strategic aim with what we hope to develop by or through the curriculum that we deliver in Key Stage 4. So there's some broad pictures here that I think it's important that parents are aware of, because it forms the underpinning part of what we aim to do with students as they move forward in their education. Cardinal Hume follows the national curriculum. Now that sounds an obvious statement to make. However, as an academy, there is not a requirement for schools that have converted to academy status to follow the national curriculum. However, schools are widely expected to do so unless there's justified reasons for them to stop following the national curriculum. We don't believe that there's any justified decisions for our students not to follow the national curriculum. So the key part of our curriculum strategy is to maintain and for our students to follow the national curriculum of study as outlined by the government. Secondly, we do believe and we continue to maintain a broad curriculum at the school. Now, we see some schools in recent years have decided to narrow their curriculum. Government performance measures are largely based around a combination of 8 subjects from a curriculum, and so therefore the best 8 scoring grades from GCSEs count towards school performance measures. Now, some schools have, within their curriculum, intend to follow the strategy to narrow it and to reduce the number of subjects that students follow, and therefore reduce the number of GCSEs that are studied, in a bid to specialise in those areas, and therefore hopefully, from in their point of view, gain better grades from those students, but in a smaller number of subjects. At Cardinal Hume, we still maintain that it's best for our students to follow a broad curriculum and therefore keep a wider base of subjects that the students will follow. So most students within the school will follow a combination of 10 different GCSE programs of study, and the options process links into that because we still maintain and still allow students to have a wider choice in terms of what options they can pick, rather than reducing that and making that really a prescribed pathway that students have to go on to and reduce that number of choice. So we think that gives them a much better foundation for moving forward, whether that be to A levels or whether that be into college or apprenticeship courses, because they still maintain a wide subject base that isn't specialised in a smaller number of subjects. We also offer a robust EBAC offer. Now, the EBAC offer is a combination of 5 different subjects that the government puts forward within their performance measures, which they view as being a combination of subjects that indicate an academic development or performance that schools can offer to their students. Now, the EBAC consists of a combination of 5 subjects: maths, English, science, humanities, so in the case of Cardinal Newman that would be either history or geography, and a modern foreign language. Now, these subjects are part of the core curriculum within the school, and therefore won't, have a major effect upon the options process that your son or daughter will be studying. However, it's important to know that as well as the options subjects that they were doing, their core curriculum will have a key, robust academic element that will give them a firm foundation for all of our students moving forward in their education. And as I said, the school maintains a key academic focus at all times. So on the last slide, I mentioned something called the core curriculum. So this is the curriculum that all of our students will study, regardless of what goes on within the options process. And it's important to mention this. I think it's an important place to start. And that's because many students will have formed the opinion that the options process is going to dominate what they do in year 10 and 11. And that's not true. At Cardinal Hume, we have a 24 1-hour teaching period week. The options subjects will only form, between 6 and 8 periods of that week. The other 16 periods were made up of the core curriculum. So the choices that are going to be made during the options process really only will affect around about a third of the curriculum or a third of their study time next year. Now, that is important, but just what is important is that all students will follow the core curriculum and pick up the majority of their GCSEs from this core curriculum. Now, the core curriculum at Cardinal Hume involves mathematics, English, and all students will study both English language and literature and cover a GCSE in both of those topics. So 2 GCSEs will come from the English programme of study. Science, the majority of students will follow a science programme that is equivalent to 2 GCSEs. A smaller number will move into triple science, where they will pick up an extra GCSE and make a 3rd GCSE in science. I'll talk more about that later on because that's a common question that parents and students have. And as a Catholic school, all of our students are expected to study GCSE RE. As well as those GCSE based subjects within the core curriculum, all students will receive lessons in physical education. There will be a programme of IAG delivered. IAG stands for Information, Advice and Guidance, which is a general development period that we use on Friday afternoon to cover a wide area of social and careers-based education. And as part of that, we have a specific bespoke careers pathway that students are expected to follow to prepare themselves for the world of work or further study when they leave school. So just to stress the fact that the core curriculum will form the key part of their curriculum, the vast majority of their time will be spent in these areas of study, and the options will take up the rest of the curriculum time, which will equate to around about 8 periods of their timetable, depending on what options they decide to choose. So let's start having a more detailed look at the options. Now, the first part of the options process is deciding on what is the best pathway to place students upon. We have 2 pathways. The first pathway within the options process is where students take a modern foreign language, and that would be French for our current year 9, and then they would select up to 3 more options. Students on this pathway will receive 2 1-hour lessons per week in each of those option subjects. The second pathway does not require French to be studied, and the time that frees up allows an extra hour per week to be given to the optional subject. So therefore they pick 3 options, and in each of those optional subjects they will receive 3 1-hour lessons. This allows the teachers to give some more support, develop more learning strategies to support those students, and just give students a little bit more time to cover the content and prepare for those exams that come along as part of those courses. Now, the first key question that many people have is, how do we decide which pathway is best for the student? Well, first of all, it's important to stress that is decided by the school. The pathway in itself is not an option for the students or parents to decide on which pathway is best for them. The school will look at the information based on students' prior attainment. We will gain teacher feedback, and we'll also bear in mind what we think is the best provision for students' own individual learning needs. We all recognise that students learn in different ways, so the requirement to prepare and do well in each of those subjects will directly be influenced about the best way that each student learns. So we'll take that into account, looking at the student profiles and what teachers say about each of those students, in order to ascertain what we think will be the most likely pathway to success. Now, although we're doing this option process in Year 9, it's possibly best to think of this as, where will the students end up at the end of Year 11? Now, when the students get to Year 11, they're going to have, by and large, 3 pathway choices to make at that point. They can come back into the school sixth form to study A-level or A-level equivalent courses. Some students will move into college to study subjects at college that the school does not offer. And some students will decide that it's best for them to go into the world of work and look to take up an apprenticeship or move on to the apprenticeship pathway. Now, my key aim at this point is to make sure that when students pick up their results on results day, when at the end of Year 11, they have all 3 options still open to them at that point. We would like as many of our students to come back into the sixth form to study A-levels, but obviously there are entry requirements for them to do so. Colleges will set entry requirements for students to get onto certain courses, and there are a wide range of apprenticeships out there. Some are higher and more advanced and better suited to students than others, where the quality of those apprenticeships are not as strong. We want students at Cardinal Hume to have all 3 option choices when they pick up those results. In order to do that, it's important that we get them on the best pathway now as they move into Year 10. That will give them the best chance for success and to pick up the best set of grades they possibly can when they get their results at the end of their GCSEs. So the decision to go on those pathways we take seriously. We look at assessment data, we look at what's been going on, but most importantly, we look at what the best way that each individual student studies and learns, and therefore make that our guiding light in terms of that initial decision as part of the option pathways. The students will find out that information when I go to visit classes and start to talk about the option process to the students individually, and they will bring home a different booklet depending on which pathway they've been we decided to put them on. So it's important to understand that decision is being taken seriously and is one that we think best suits the students' individual needs. So the final thing to look at before we look at the specific option choices and the subjects that are on offer is just to make parents in particular familiar with the different qualification types that are now studied. You know, some parents, when they were at school, the majority of qualifications that would have been available would have been GCSE based subjects. So it's important to know that things may have developed slightly since that time, and now students can follow mainly 2 different qualification types at Cardinal Hume. The first one is the one that most people will have heard of, and obviously that's the GCSE. So the GCSE is a subject which has an academic focus. It's assessed largely by linear exam, and by that what we mean is that the students will follow a programme of study for 2 years in 10 and 11, and then their judgments or their assessments and the grade that they will receive will be based on exams that take place at the end of those courses, largely in May and June of Year 11. This involves a classroom-based approach, which is a traditional teacher-led delivery, where students will receive that information in a traditional lesson, will be expected to make notes and carry out activities as part of that, and then use that information and those resources to revise for exams at the end of the 2 years. An alternative to GCSEs are vocational courses. Now, it's important to stress that vocational courses have fully equal weighting to GCSEs, and the grades that the students get in these vocational courses are fully equitable to the grades that they would get at GCSE. There is no difference in the grades in vocational courses to GCSE. It's a common misconception where students think that the quality of the courses in vocational are less at GCSE simply because they think that the grades that they get are not worth as much as the GCSE grades. That's simply not true. The grades that students get on these vocational courses have equal weighting, and in many cases have more relevance to what they want to do later on when they go into pathways of further study after years 10 and 11. How they differ though is that vocational courses do have a more applied focus. By that we mean they are more related to the real world. So there's more real life learning takes place within the vocational courses rather than theoretical academic work that's covered in GCSE. They're assessed continually throughout the course. There is external exams, and those external exams can take place during different windows during the 2 years. However, other forms of assessment come from teacher assessment of assignments and coursework that take place during the course of the 2 years, and the final grade is an aggregation of the overall grades in the exams and in the internally assessed work to arrive at a final judgment. There is both a classroom and non-classroom approach, so there's a traditional taught element to it, but the non-classroom approach means putting a real world context on it and applying the learning that they're doing in class to what would happen in real life scenarios. At Cardinal Hume we follow 2 vocational courses. We follow the BTEC courses that are awarded by the Edexcel awarding body, and the Cambridge Nationals, which are equivalent to BTECs and very similar in structure, only that they are awarded by the OCR awarding body. Earlier in the presentation I talked to you about the 2 different pathways that are available for students to move into when they move into year 10. I'd now like to talk about the specific subjects that are available as options on each of those pathways. So let's start with pathway 1. Students that go into pathway 1 will study a modern foreign language. In the case of our current year 9, that would be a GCSE in French. Their first option choice will then involve picking a humanities subject, and that would be either GCSE in geography or a GCSE in history. The intention at the school is for students just to select one of those 2 GCSE choices as part of their options. However, in the options booklet there will be an opportunity to indicate, in the space provided, an interest in studying both of those. If numbers are viable, I will look to put an extra group that will allow students to pick up a second humanities subject as part of their option choices. However, in the past, sometimes numbers have not been viable or have not been able to do this. So please indicate that within the option booklet if that's something you're interested in, but I must stress that that is not always a viable pathway that we can staff because of low numbers interested in doing that. Once students have opted to select either geography or history, they then have to pick 2 further option choices on this pathway from the following list: art, business studies, computer science, DT, food technology and preparation, Spanish, music, performing arts and sport. All of those subjects apart from the 2 courses in red are GCSE courses, and the 2 courses in red there, performing arts and sport, are vocational courses as described on the previous slide. I've asterisked Spanish and computer science. Spanish because obviously this is a second and new language that students may not have studied before, so we therefore require some sort of aptitude to studying languages before students are allowed to pick that as a second choice, and that will be at the discretion of the head of Modern Foreign Languages, Mrs. Wood. At the point of option, students should just indicate that they're interested in doing Spanish as well as French, and we will then deal with those students with the languages department once we know who is interested. Computing is another example of a course where we look to have some sort of prior attainment before students are able to take that subject. This is because of the computational thinking processes that are involved in computing and the prior logical thinking that we often see in maths. So therefore we do look at maths prior attainment before working out if this is a suitable pathway for students to take. However, we'll not only just take that into account. If there are some students that we're not 100% certain on, what we do is we work with those students and give them a little project just to make sure that they have an understanding of some of the content and some of the processes, particularly linked to coding and programming, that will be required to succeed in computing. Many students opt for computing believing that it's IT, whereas really it's looking at the technical side of the computing world, and in particular how to use code and programming in computers. And some students pick that without fully understanding that or fully reading the information or listening to the teacher about what that course involves. So we will have a look at the students that are interested in that from their option choices and make some sort of decisions or speak to some of those students before we give the go ahead for that to happen. Now, triple science is an additional science subject that can be taken, but I'll talk a bit more about that in detail a little later in the presentation, because that involves some of the information that we need to take into account before triple science subjects can be taken as part of the options. But should students be selected to study triple science, then the extra lessons that are required to do the additional science will be taken from one of those option choices. So at the point of taking your options, we simply ask students and parents to opt from two of those lists, and I'll talk a little bit more in this presentation about how triple science will affect those choices. So now let's have a look at the second pathway. And just a reminder that this pathway does not involve studying modern foreign language, and the lessons that frees up allows us to spend an extra hour in each of those option subjects to give students extra help and support in getting the best grades possible. So students, as in the previous pathway, will opt to take either GCSE Geography or GCSE History. They will then select two of the following list: Art and Design, Business, Engineering, Health and Social Care, Sport, Media and IT. So at this point of the presentation, I'd like to spend a little bit more time talking about triple science and the potential impact that could have on the options. This is often the most common query that I face regarding the options process, because it's a little out of sync of some of the normal ways in which we get students to opt for their subjects. The first and most important point to make is, with regard to triple science, is that students are not allowed to opt for this subject. It won't be a free option choice as the other option subjects will be. Instead, students are selected by the science department based on the science department's opinion of how well they think students will do with the extra demands of studying an additional science. All students in years 10 and 11 will follow a course which will lead to a 2 GCSE equivalent course. Students that are selected to do triple science will do 2 extra lessons in science and do individual GCSEs in each of the 3 science disciplines. So that's chemistry, biology and physics. This involves extra skills and qualities and knowledge in the scientific subjects, and as a result of which we opt students rather than giving students free choice, with the danger of them not achieving grades that they would do in other subjects that are available to them. The selection of those students will take place later in the year following assessments as part of the Year 9 assessment programme. So at the point of the choices that we're asking the students and parents to look at the option subjects, that information is not yet available. So what we do is we ask students to opt as though triple science does not exist, and once the science department have identified the students that they would like to do triple science, we will gather those students together and explain how that will impact upon their options and the fact that they will have to drop one of their option choices in order to pick up the extra lessons required to study triple science. Students will get free choice on which of those subjects they're allowed to drop if they decide to do triple science. With that in mind, it's important to note that if selected, students do not have to take the triple science option if they do not want to. They may stick with their original option choices if they think that's what's best for them and that wants to be their programs of study in year 10. If they do, as I've said, triple science gets timetable at the same time as the option subjects, so therefore it will take up one of those option slots, and we'll ask students to decide which of the original options they want to drop in favour of studying triple science. So the final part of the presentation is going to look at the practicalities of what goes on during the options process and how we go about getting that information from the students. Over the course of the coming days, I'll be going around to visit the students and going through a similar presentation as what I've put together here for parents and people at home, and talking through how the options process will work. And at the end of that, I will give each student the relevant options booklet for whatever pathway that they have been put on. Obviously that booklet is going to come home, and we therefore expect students and parents to read it carefully, because it will contain some information about the options process, how to complete the form, but it will also give some individual subject information about the option choices that are available. So a good starting point is just to read that carefully. We then would expect some students to have some additional questions and queries that they may well want to ask about. For some students, they already know what they want to do, and they'll go ahead and fill that options booklet in without any additional information and bring that back to the tutors. However, some students may well have questions or want to get some additional information from people in school. So we do advise that the students have the opportunity to discuss that with their parents. It's always good for parents to be involved in this process. Their tutors at school can be a useful source of information and guidance, but perhaps most importantly, if we go to have a look at some of the subject teachers and some of the help and information that the subject teachers can give. I'll be asking the subject teachers and the heads of department to put on some information sessions over the coming weeks, where students can sit and listen to what goes on in their subjects in years 10 and 11, and help guide them with their choices based on that information that's provided. For subjects that don't have any contact time with Year 9, then I'll arrange a time when those subject leaders can come along to other lessons and pass on that information for subjects that only get started being taught in Year 10. No doubt, the information that I provided today and the additional information that the students will get will deal with the vast majority of queries that people have, and it'll be a situation where they can go and fill in the option booklets, bring them back into school, and then deal with any additional situations later on as time passes by. However, you may well have some additional queries or some specific questions that you might want to ask. Then the situation then is, if you pick up the phone, give the school a call and ask to speak to myself, Mr. Errington, who's assistant head teacher at the school, or also helping me out in this process is Mr. Eccleston, who is the Year 9 progress leader. So if you have a query, let the school know, and we'll give you a call back as soon as we can, just to go through any specific questions that you may have. On a very small number of occasions, that sometimes there might be ongoing queries or ongoing issues that we might want to deal with through a face-to-face interview. And of course, we have COVID restrictions in place, which put a limit on what we can do in terms of bringing people from outside of school inside of school. But we look to get some sort of meeting put in place, either in school, as long as those meet the COVID guidelines and the risk assessment of the school, or we may well do that over the phone or online if need be. But there will be an opportunity, if need be, to have some sort of additional meeting if that's required. Now, obviously, the options process normally starts in February of each year, and we normally get these forms handed back in by sometime in mid-March each year. Now, because of lockdown and the students returning back to school in March, we thought it's best to put that back. So the forms are going to come home, and we're going to give the students and parents a decent length of time to discuss this and not rush through the process. So we're going to look for forms to be brought back after the Easter holidays and to be handed back into tutors by Friday the 23rd of April. Now, I must stress there's not a prize for getting them in as quickly. Students aren't advantaged by bringing them in quicker than other students, but we would like those forms brought back by the 23rd, because obviously we're delaying things slightly a bit, and I need to get quite a bit of information processed in order to structure arrangements for next year and build the school timetable for next year. So it would be advantageous if I can get that information back for Friday the 23rd of April. However, if people need more time, because we know that the Year 9 has been truncated and there's been situations where students might need a little bit more time to make up their minds, then we'll be open to that. So if you think there's going to be a slight delay in getting back those forms back by that date, let us know, and of course we'll be flexible with that based on the impact that lockdowns had on students and what's gone on this year during their Year 9 studies. But otherwise, I'll ask for those forms to come back to tutors, not to me. Go back to tutors who will collate, and I'll give them some information on how to collate those forms by Friday the 23rd of April. So to bring things to a conclusion, I'd like just to talk a little bit about giving some general points of advice to students when making their option choices. Now, what I'm going to say over the next minute or two really is common sense, but each year we have situations where students struggle a little bit to make some choices and don't really reflect properly on how they should go about making those choices. So a little bit of advice when doing that. So the first point I would suggest is to have a look at what you're good at doing. Over the course of years 7, 8 and 9, you've carried a number of assessments have been carried out at school, so students should have a good idea of the subjects or the types of subject that they're good at doing. So use that information to help guide you, because if you've had a successful start in those subjects during years 7, 8 and 9, there's a good chance that you can continue working in a similar vein in years 10, 11. So that's a good indication of what subjects you might be successful at moving forward. Secondly, and this next point should not be underestimated, all right, it's clear that students will learn better if they enjoy that subject. So consider what you enjoy in the subjects that you like doing. If you like doing something, you're going to be more motivated, and the chances are that you'll end up with a better grade as a result. So contemplate what subjects you enjoy doing and build that into your decision. Less important in my opinion, but something that you may well want to consider nonetheless, is what do you want to do after year 11? As I've stressed throughout this presentation, decisions you make now in year 9 are not going to have a massive effect on what you do later in life. Nobody at age 30 and when they start their career path looks back at year 9 and think, oh, the reason why I'm in this situation now is because I made a wrong choice when I was 13 years old. That's not true. But you may well want to take into account something that you might be committed to wanting to do after year 11, whether that be A-levels, apprenticeships, or going to college. So you may well want to pick a combination of subjects that you think might complement what you want to do later on in the next stages of your pathways. So you might want to consider that. However, each year, what does frustrate me a little bit, and what's something that occurs every year, is that some students come to see me at some point and said, I would like to change what I want to do for my options. Can I change, sir? And when pushed, I ask them, it transpires that the choices that there's being made is largely because they've followed their friends in terms of doing the option choices that are going on. We've left this process until year 9 deliberately. In year 9, we think students have got the maturity to be independent and make decisions about what's right for themselves. And they shouldn't simply pick a subject based on what their friends or peers are doing. However, each year when I give these booklets out, I see students walking around talking, and a common form of conversation is, what are you going to do? I'd like to think that students can be independent enough to make a decision on what's best for them, rather than just to be with their friends in class. You're going to see lots of your friends during the course of year 10, 11 at break times and in other lessons in the core curriculum after school, and plenty of opportunities to catch up with them. Subjects are there to be worked hard at, and lessons should be an opportunity to learn, not to meet up with friends. So please make a choice of what's best for you, not what's best for your friend. And my final bit of advice today is to get advice, not to be stressed by this process. Stress comes from problems that are not being solved. In order to alleviate that stress, you need to solve those problems. And to solve those problems, you need to go to speak to people and get advice about what's troubling you or what issues you have in terms of making a decision. If you don't do anything, those problems will still exist. If you do something about them, those problems will go away. So please take the opportunity to get advice, listen to your teachers, speak with parents, speak with your tutors, and use that information and advice to make a decision. If you feel as though you've made a decision that you want to change for legitimate reasons, then don't be shy to come forward to see me to say, sir, I'd like to change if possible. And certainly if it's possible to change and it's going to have no impact on other aspects of your timetable and there's space to make those changes, I would be more than happy to do so. So feel free to come along to speak to me if you think you've made a mistake and you want to change your mind. I'm more than willing to have a discussion about that. Okay, so that brings the presentation to an end. Hopefully I've covered through all the key points of what's going to happen now and what happens next and how the options process work, and any queries that you've got have been answered through this presentation. So it leaves nothing more to say but the good luck. Take the process seriously, get that advice, make the decisions, but most importantly, not to worry about it and to make sure that any issues you have get dealt with. So good luck everybody, and come to see me if you've got any issues. Thanks for listening.